My guest is a fellow Ableton Certified Trainer who toured the world as Kill Paris. We talked about workflow creativity and the new updates to Ableton Live 12.1. Please welcome Cory Baker to the Music Production Podcast. This episode is sponsored by Baby Audio, and I want to show you their new exciting vocal plugin called Humanoid. I've got a little vocal here, and this is what it sounds on its own.
But it's something I can never do.
Lyrics inspired by Terminator 2, it seemed appropriate. And now I'm going to turn on Humanoid.
But there's nothing wrong with you.
And this is about as tame as Humanoid gets. We'll bring back in the music. And I'm going to quantize the vocals a little more. We can robotify it even further, and we can play with the formants.
It's when it hurts, but there's nothing wrong with you.
Lots of versatility here with just these few controls. And then the next section allows us to add in some synthesis. So there's a wavetable synthesizer that combines with your voice. And you can choose different waveforms and experiment with those forms as much as you like. And of course, you could always automate this stuff for fun. You can add in a higher octave or a lower octave. Filter this down a bit and even add some fun effects, a widen and a warble. There's a freeze, which is really cool. So just engage that, and then there's a buffer you can play with. Very versatile plugin here for getting those extreme vocal effects.
I know why you cry.
Now you might think of autotune as being subtle to extreme effects. Humanoid starts at extreme and goes way beyond that, which is why it's so fun. And a really cool feature is you can use MIDI from your MIDI controller to trigger the notes inside of Humanoid. So I'm going to switch on the MIDI switch here, and I've got push, and I'm going to play this again. And we're going to be able to hear what we can do with our MIDI controller, which is pretty cool.
I know why you cry, but it's something I can never do.
And by playing the pads on my keyboard,
It's when it hurts,
I can
but there's nothing
make my own new melodies.
with you. I know why you cry, but it's something I can never do.
So you can re-synthesize your parts like you would on a vocoder.
With you,
I'm going to go back to the scale mode.
I know why you cry.
So this is Humanoid. I'm just scratching the surface playing around with it here and having a lot of fun. It's a really cool extreme vocal plugin that takes your vocals to all kinds of cool futuristic levels. So check it out. Go to babyaudio.io. That's babyaud.io and check out Humanoid. Use the code MPP15 to save 15% off. The plugin is currently discounted, so this code will get you an extra 15% off. It's a great time to check it out. Humanoid is a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying it, and I think you will too. Go to babyaud.io and use the code MPP15 to save 15%. Welcome aboard, Cory. Good to have you, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. As I was saying before we started recording here, I just can't believe that we have never met in person before.
Yeah, I've been, enjoying your work for a long time and seeing how it's changed a bit. And somehow, I don't know, maybe we were just like slightly off timing or something, Yeah.
Well, when did you start using Ableton?
I started using that probably around 2009. I had been in a band and the band broke up, and so I was getting a lot more into just doing my own thing, and I wanted to be able to play live. So live, comes along, and I had like an old version from like a Pro Tools that I bought years before, and kind of checked it out. But all the tutorials, as I was telling you before, everything was like Ableton Live, looking up like, how do you use a compressor? Well, in Ableton Live, we have and it was like the community was so good. And I got pulled into that, really.
Yeah. So what version would that have been of Live?
I think I managed to get my hands on version 7.
Oh, wow.
But 8 might have been out. But, in the dark corners of the internet, it was easier to find 7.
Yeah. Well, there weren't that many dark corners, so there's only a few places you had to look.
Yeah. Well, at that point, I was pretty good at figuring that out. I've confused making music with downloading software,
That's a great descriptor. And I'm sure a lot of people
I think a lot of us go through that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, because I think it was around the same time that I got into it, because 7 was the first one that I had, and then I think the first one I bought was 8. Back in the day. Actually, I was just talking about this the other day. Like when you used to buy software back then, and especially Ableton, it came in this big box, and because there wasn't like YouTube, there wasn't like, I'm sure they had like a PDF manual, but you actually got like a thick manual like in the box, and that was like how you would learn like a lot of things, because there just wasn't that many like resources back then.
Yeah, all those DVDs. That's what happened when I got Pro Tools, because you really couldn't find Pro Tools, and you needed the hardware to run it too. So they kind of had you that way. And I think the first version I bought was 9. Maybe it was 8, but I think it was 9. But I got digital. Yeah. So I never got the box and the manual.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I still have my box somewhere.
Yeah. Because I had people have them all like lined up. And
yeah, well, I had, because we were talking about Logic like a little bit earlier, because like before I found out about Ableton, I was on Logic.
Yeah, me too.
And that was the time of the dongle. Like the version that I was on was like the last version where you had to have like the dongle. It was like basically like their version of like an iLock. And I remember it being even like so annoying at the time, because like had one of those like white plastic like MacBooks. And it only had 2, USB ports.
Right.
But that was like another thing. It's like there was a box. Like you got like a box with it, and it had like a manual and everything. And I think I still have that somewhere too.
Oh man, I'm so glad we don't need dongles anymore.
Oh my God.
It's just so annoying. I'll be honest, like even iLock, sometimes I'm just like, I don't want to do this. I've not downloaded things because it had iLock attached to it.
Yeah. I think like, which I'd be curious to hear kind of like where you're at now as far as like your like music making process. But I feel like I'm, especially with the updates of Ableton that we've gotten in the last couple, with 12 and then now the 12.1, I'm like more and more just trying to use or figure out how to use, just like Ableton stuff with maybe, a few extra like VSTs. But it's like nowadays with all the subscription services and, the updates and stuff like that, it's a real like headache. Or even trying to use like a plugin from, like 5 years ago that now like doesn't work on Apple Silicon, and then you go and try to open that up, and like I don't know.
Yeah, when I was first using Live and playing Live, when I first got into Live, I was like, you know what, I've got all these illegal plugins now, and like I don't know how to use any of them. So I really focused on just learning what was in Live. I got rid of everything. I think my conscience caught up with me, and I was like, I'm going clean, and I'm going to learn this stuff, and then I'll figure out what I need from there. And I really didn't need a lot. There were certain things, but for performing live, I really wanted to keep it as Ableton native as possible, because that tends to be where things go wrong. The stuff inside of Live is pretty stable, but when I'd have, various plugins, especially if they were found on the dark corners of the internet, you run into issues. So
the old
there's stuff
wave
I
shell.
like. Yeah. Right. Yeah, all those like torrent sites. Oh,
Yeah. So
hanging
classic.
out seedy characters.
I
Yeah.
remember, yeah, there was just so many things of like the answer and like response thing, and then there was like ways to like get around that by like shutting off your internet for a time or like copying the. Yeah, that was like an interesting like underground like thing. I know that
Mm.
stuff's like still going on, but it was like back in the day, like yeah. I mean, maybe we shouldn't be talking about that, but it was it was a
Well,
bit. It's
that
a
whole
part of the
time
history.
period, of the
Yeah.
internet, we were used to getting everything.
Yeah.
Music, movies. Like you just kind of that's what you did, or you
Yeah.
knew somebody that knew how to do it, and they would hook
Mhm.
you up.
Yeah.
But we came a long way in starting to get used to paying for stuff,
Yeah.
and we really pay very little for any of it if you really think about what you're getting. Especially if you think about some of like the plugins compared to like the hardware, what that would cost you.
Yeah.
Music, like everything for $15 a month is kind of silly.
It's wild. Yeah, like it's like as an artist, like there's a lot of things that like suck about it, but like as a consumer, that's like holy
Hmm.
shit, like you have like everything. And it's so crazy. Like even just the other day, I was like chatting with a friend about like music, and it's like to share an album like nowadays, like if whether it's Apple Music or Spotify, whatever, it's like you literally just like share like in a text message, and it's like here you have the album now, like this thing that back in the day I don't want to sound like old people, but back in the day you had to like really search for things and like
Yeah, like bring it over.
yeah.
I'll come to your
Bring
house.
it over.
Yeah. There was a value to that though, right? Like I mean, I'm sure you remember like albums growing on you.
Mhm.
Like, I don't get that as much anymore. It sort of has to get me the first time. And then if it doesn't, like, why am I going to put it on? I have every other album in the world to listen
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking about that this morning on my bike ride, because last year I went through for the first time like a Beatles phase. Like, because
Mm.
I've always been one of those people who's like, I don't like the Beatles. Like, I don't get it. And growing up, I had, one friend specifically who is like obsessed with them, always had like every single thing that was never released, and, all the side projects and all that stuff. But for some reason, last year, I kind of like went down the rabbit hole and found that the Wings album for Paul McCartney, and Wings Band on the Run, like that album, I for some reason like gravitated towards and started to like listen to it a little bit and kind of was getting into it, and then like just almost forced myself to kind of keep listening to it. And then now like I was just listening to it today and thinking about that, about how yeah, like you don't really have that chance unless you force yourself to like listen to something over and over to let it like really, hook you. Where like that back in the day, you would just listen to stuff over and over because that's all you had to listen to. So it's like, well, I could go listen to the other album that I've heard a million times, or try to like, listen to this some more and figure out what it is that, is special
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, like I spent all my money on this album. So I'm going to try real hard to like it. There's got to be a song in here somewhere,
Yeah.
So you put a little work in.
Yeah. And what was like your early like music that I guess drove you to like being in a band, or just like, pursuing music? Like what were the artists or albums?
It was a lot of 90s alternative, Nirvana, Smashing Pumpkins, Weezer's first two albums. Those are some of the big ones. I think those bands kind of made you feel like you could play in a band, but you could play guitar, because I learned so much off of this guitar tab book of like Nevermind by Nirvana. And I was like, I can kind of do this,
This is easy. Power chords.
Yeah, you think it's
Interesting.
easy, right? But like then you start to realize some of the intricacies of it. But that stuff seemed way more approachable than like, some of like the hair metal
Yeah.
that was going on before with like big guitar solos and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the punk stuff was like, yeah, we don't care if we're good at instruments. So it was an attractive thing for me.
Yeah. It's funny as you're saying that, I feel like that time as well, like if you're starting out, because did you start with guitar?
Yeah,
Is that your
at like 14?
Okay. Yeah, so that's about the same. I think I was like 16 when I started playing guitar. But it's funny that guitar at that time, it was like your introduction to music is like through the guitar, but then like the gear introduction, I feel like, is when you're trying to play some of these like Nirvana songs, but then you're like, wait, why doesn't my guitar sound like this? And then you learn about like distortion, right? So your first time like learning about distortion, you're like, wait, what is that? It's like, oh, you get a distortion pedal, you buy some. I mean, at least for me, it was like I bought some like cheap, $30, guitar pedal, like distortion from like musician's friend. I was like, this sounds like shit. Like this doesn't sound like them. And then you go down like the gear rabbit hole of learning about amps and then all of, this other stuff, which that, once you get into electronic music, I feel like that just bleeds into like, okay, you have like the stock stuff, but then, okay, what is that sound from this, Depeche Mode album or whatever? And you're like, oh, it's this like, it's a sequential 8 or whatever. And you're like, oh, okay, well, those are $4,000. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, how do we get there?
Yeah. Yeah, guitar pedals were probably like the first gear,
Yeah.
and like getting into recording, and then I need like reverb.
Yeah, what's reverb?
Yeah.
Echo, flanger. Wait, why I had a real like aha moment in, I think it must have been like 2011 when I could, I mean, not to make this like a whole story, but I worked at Sweetwater after college for about like 2 years, because like where I grew up in Indiana, like the Sweetwater headquarters is like 40 minutes south of where I grew up.
And that's quite a spectacle, right? Like you can go in there and
yeah, and I haven't seen it in a long time, but when I was there, it was like a spectacle, but it's constantly like growing. It's like its own like city.
Yeah,
like
Disney World for musicians.
Yeah. But I got a job there, like in the warehouse, like minimum wage job, and basically just worked my way up to get a job like in the store. And you get like the discounts that you get as an employee there, even when you work like in the warehouse, whatever, is crazy. And like the discount, I don't know if they still do it now, but the discount for UAD stuff was like you get a discount on the hardware, but then as long as you continue to work there, you basically get an NFR for all of their plugins, like for free. And it just like re-ups like every year. Like you have to like do a form thing or whatever. But tying this into guitar pedal stuff is like, growing up, like one of my favorite bands was Incubus. And they would use a lot of like, flangers and like phasers and stuff. And I was like, oh, that's like such a cool sound. And then you use like, like the Digitech, like multi-effects pedals, that was like one of my first like guitar things. It's like the flangers and phasers always just sounded like shit. And then when I started using the UAD stuff, they have the MXR, like kind of the goat of like, flanger, phaser. And I remember turning that on for like the first time in Ableton, putting it on something. And I was like, oh, like this is what flanging and phasers are supposed to sound like. Yeah, this is a good sound. Like, so I don't know. It's just funny, like the journey of, especially like our era when digital was still like so new and everything was turning to digital, and then they were making these recreations of things, or just like shitty. Like I feel like the old like Digitech like pedals are such a great example of like, something that has like 200 presets, but it's like they're all pretty terrible, like, and just sound just thin and like like shishy. I don't know. I don't know what.
They kind of hurt your ears.
Yeah, they hurt. But at the time you're just flipping through stuff like, yeah, dude, like this is, this is sick.
Yeah, I had like the DoD FX7. Oof. It was like every effect, including grunge. Like their effect. And it was just, multi-effect. And I think it had like 3 different presets you could switch between, and then the banks. You could put like 3 pedals. And they were all just like so shrill, and like biting. And when you switch to like a different sound, there's like a whole second of silence. So it's almost unusable in like a live context.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of effects that I just thought were just stupid effects. Like phaser was one of them. And I'm like, why would I ever want a phaser ever on anything? But then like getting into synthesis and stuff and trying it in those contexts with like better phasers, better, even digital ones, you're like, oh, okay, this is kind of cool. I get it now.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And understanding like dry and wet, like that's kind of like a big, it doesn't sound big like to anybody who's been making music for, longer than like 2 years, but like, that's a good example of like, phasers and flangers. It's like, yeah, if you have them cranked up, like just like on all the way, like a lot of like, those shitty like effects pedals would have, like, yeah, it puts a bad taste in your ears, really. But then like learning like a little bit about mixing is like, oh, if you just have like 10% like wet of like a flanger on anything, like it usually can do a lot and like sounds good. And yeah, you don't really, until you kind of start to understand what's going on, you don't really have any like reference point of what something is, useful for.
Yeah, that blending idea was a revelation, because a lot of pedals are just like all or nothing.
Yeah.
You don't get the clean in there because it kind of doesn't make sense with a lot of guitar sounds.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny when you think back to like little concepts like that, but how important they really are.
Yeah.
Stuff you just sort of take for granted after a while.
I mean, I vividly remember when I had understood what limiting was, and just like how much of a revelation that was, of like, because in my mind at the time, I was like, oh, now I can push things as hard as I want and it'll keep it, sounding good. That's what I thought, like at the time,
right.
Which, isn't really true, but still like that. And then like the first time you learn about like sidechain compression, that was like a huge one. Just like, oh, that's how like movement and the like that sound, like, yeah, it's wild. And reverb too. Reverb's like a huge one of like when you understand, or not even understand, you just like have a reverb that you can use and you're like, wait, like this sounds amazing, like on anything. Like everything sounds better. What the hell?
Yeah. Well, sidechain compression was interesting for me because it reminded me of the way tape interacted. Because if you, like on my 4-track cassette recorder, if you had like a super loud kick drum on track 1, it screwed up track 2. Like it had an impact on it and just kind of pushed it out of the way. It was almost just ducked it automatically. But then inside the computer, everything is so independent. It's the digital stuff. It doesn't matter what's on track 2 when track 1 is going. There's that interaction is important. And I think even in like really subtle amounts, you can get like some life in a track, just having things kind of affect each other a little bit.
Yeah.
You've seen a lot of that with like dynamic plugins now, like EQs even, that just sort of react to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is huge. I remember Wolfgang Gardner saying in an interview like forever ago, like when they were asking him like what, how to make stuff sound good, like his or whatever. And he, said he's like sidechain everything to everything. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, but it makes sense because you do need like, at least the way, like when I teach, I try to tell people that like you want there to be, like you're building an ecosystem and you need things to like interact with other things, and like certain parts where this thing is going to come out more, but then when that goes away, this thing, comes back up, and finding ways to like modulate things together or have them affect each other, I feel like breathes, life into a track. And a lot of that is like side chaining or, like envelope followers or, stuff like that. And yeah, it really does like make a huge difference.
That's what happens when you play with other musicians, right? Like you definitely interact, and I think the sound itself just kind of interacts a bit too. But if everyone's getting a little softer or quieter, like, okay, like you kind of, you have to react a little.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because I guess that like, yeah, if you don't play, in a band or like jam with other people, just thinking of like people starting out today or, even people that have been working for like the last like 5 years or whatever, like it is hard to know, to not just be like the God figure, at the computer, like, building your city,
Yeah.
like, yeah, knowing. Yeah, that's interesting because like you're totally right. When you jam with somebody or play, like you get to be playing, but more importantly, you have to be listening, and the
Mm.
other person hopefully is doing the same thing, and that's how things, move and feel organic and have contrast, to each other.
Yeah, and you really notice it when somebody's not. They're just kind of going full blast,
Yeah.
and everyone's like trying to bring it
Okay.
down or even lift it up, and they're just not coming along for the ride. It's
Yeah.
like it's hard. That's a whole other skill, I mean, I wasn't in band or I didn't like learn to read music or any of that stuff. I took some guitar lessons. That's about it. And I found it kind of surprising when like some of the kids that were in bands that did have this formal training would come into like my world where we're just kind of bouncing things off of each other and interacting, and they kind of didn't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't, what do I play? Like, where are the notes? Or how do I know when to get quiet or loud? And stuff that we were just kind of doing by feel, from just being in that experience without somebody like kind of waving their hands around and pointing at us to get quiet.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because I've been thinking about this too of like, when students like ask me like if, how much music theory do I need to learn or like what's, where do I go and learn music theory? And I mean, this might make me like a bad teacher, but I always tell people it's like it's more important that you train like your ears and listen to what you like and try to at least understand what you can about like what that is versus you like looking at music. Like it's more important to hear music and know, find your place like in that or even in like a jam like setting or in a setting where you don't have like music theory, but you're training your ears on like, whether it's by playing or just listening to other things and trying to figure out like what that is. Like I mean, I feel like in the long run, that's a much more valuable like skill set. And it's also very hard to teach someone like how to like improv or, just like jam, to something. But I feel like that's the creative part, really.
Yeah, to recognize if what you're playing is fitting, if it's working, or if it's competing with other stuff, or if it's even just the right note or not.
Yeah.
That's a tricky one, because music theory is definitely helpful. I mean, you kind of need to know, or at least understand some of it on at least some basic level. But it's not everything either. And so there's a balance to find, I guess.
Yeah. Well, there's also so many other things that if you're
it's not just that, yeah.
Yeah, if you're a music producer specifically, if you're like using Ableton or FL Studio, whatever it may be, like music theory is kind of the least of your worries. Like as you're starting out, like because just understanding what's going on the screen and how to interact with all that stuff and get to the sound you like and all that. Like I feel like that's such a big like hurdle. But then also it's like at least with where, Ableton's at now, like the music theory stuff, like if you're somebody who has no music theory and like doesn't want to learn it, like, man, there's never been a better time to jump in and just like play with stuff because there's so many ways in that like it kind of puts like the, like bowling bumpers.
Right.
Like when you go bowling, like there's so many ways to set things up to have those like key and scale like bumpers to where you can just kind of chuck stuff and see, what happens. And to me, that's like one of the most exciting things about this whole like scale awareness thing, and even the new like auto shift of like, let's do some really wrong things, but set up like the, put on our pads first before we do it. And let's just see
Keep
what
us
happens.
out of the gutter.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I feel like kids these days, they got it good. Let me tell you.
Yeah. Well, it's nice that you can just say no bad notes, no out of key notes. And, that's where the theory comes in, because then you can know when and out of key or out of scale or borrowed note really makes a point and helps, create some emotional impact. But to have that stuff is pretty cool. And yeah, I like that. I like what it's done to the MIDI tools, like the MIDI devices in live, because
Holy shit.
stuff like the chord device, I never really had a lot of use for, because if you set it up and the chord device is just going to take whatever MIDI note you play and add intervals to it. So if you set it up to play like a major chord, you play a C, it's a C major, play D, it's D major, E, it's an E major. So you're always getting these just major chords. So it's not in a key really. Which I think is one reason you hear a lot of that in some like dance music, electronic music, where these kind of just, maybe it's just minor chords or just major chords. I forget what that term is called, like parallel or something like that. But now like you can set up those intervals in the chord device, play the C, you get the major, play the D, you get the minor chord, because it's going to constrict everything to the scale. And I think where it gets really interesting is when you start adding some higher extensions to it.
Mm-hmm.
Now you got these kind of like more jazzy chords that are being kind of fit into the key. And I think that device, especially the chord, is like, it's really exciting now.
Yeah. And it's funny that you bring that up, because when I moved to LA the first time, and it was after I became a certified trainer, like leaving Sweetwater and moving to LA to go do the music thing, like I was like teaching, basically to like make a living for the first like year or so. And the first person who I did a session with, he was the son of the guy who played the guitar on Marvin Gaye's Let's Get It On, the like wah guitar. And we like met like in his like studio, like in Burbank, like super cool. But he showed me, he was like, oh, like we were going through some stuff, and I don't even know how we got on the topic, but he was like, you could do that like chord trick. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, you just like grab like the chord and then you put the scale after it and set it to, the key, whatever key you're in, and then basically do like what you're saying and do now what 12 does with like the scale awareness. But he like showed me that and I was like, whoa. Like just having the scale after it. Yeah. Just like opens up like, everything. And that was like pre, the Xfer like Cthulhu plugin that's like a big like chord bank thing, and has the single note chords that you can do. You just set it to the key, and it has like a chord bank, whatever. That sort of thing. And that is like something that's super exciting, like in 12, of just everything now having the that scale awareness with it, and the MIDI tools, and even just because that's the thing, it's like you can still just chuck things like at the wall, but now having the ability to like transpose stuff, but like transpose it within the key of like you were saying, it's like it might go to this chord that doesn't quite sound right. Well, now you can just kind of shift that, down within the scale and figure out like if that sounds better than what it was, before, as opposed to like trying to figure out, it's like, okay, I'm going to move everything down like 3, and then, well, now that 5th like isn't hitting a key. Now we got to move that up and do that whole, song and dance.
Yeah, well, like the arpeggiator, it's another good example. Like when you add the steps to the arpeggiator, the only interval I would ever choose was an octave.
Yeah.
Because if I'm going to choose like 2 steps, why do I want this to play the 3 notes I'm holding down and then 2 steps above and then 2 steps above that? Like it never worked musically. I mean, you could do the scale thing you're talking about, but now that it's just going to do that in the key, like you get some like interesting accidents almost. There's a cool interaction that happens, and even if you understand the theory, like it's nice to just have these things kind of that you wouldn't play.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can like kind of, put in your notes or hold down some keys and listen for interesting things. Opens a lot of doors.
Yeah, because I think, at least for me, and it might be the same like for you, but it's like as you've been working with Ableton and just music in general for so long, I feel like the thing that I'm always trying to get back to is that like beginner's mind. They talk about like in Buddhism of like not having any preconceptions or anything and just like trying things where you don't know what the outcome is going to be, but when it's like good, then that sparks like your inspiration and creativity, and that's kind of like the spark to get you on your way to like finish something or make something cool. And I feel like a lot of this like scale stuff, like at least for me, like offers that, because then you can just really be like in experimental mode, but again, experimental mode with the bumpers on, that's going to kind of keep things still like musical, as opposed to just like, well, like what the interaction that is happening here is really cool, but it's like the sound that's coming out is not cool because like it's not like in key and it's not like usable. Where I feel like now, you just have a lot of ways to like, again, just chuck things like almost like a quantized like cheese grater or something that's like quantized to the scale, and you can just chuck whatever cheeses you want like through it and then get this like beautiful blend afterwards. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the dangers sometimes when you learn the theory and you learn the rules, is that you kind of just adhere to them. And you're not in that beginner thing where there's so many times in my life where I've played with people that don't understand. They don't know what the notes on the guitar are, say. And they therefore do things that you're not really supposed to do, but it sounds cool. And you're like, oh yeah, listen to that. Yeah, I wouldn't have done that because I'm following the rules too much.
Yeah.
So to have stuff now that lets you just kind of play and forget it a little bit, and then you can kind of come back and bring your knowledge.
Yeah,
it's a really fun place to be. It's inspiring, and sometimes I think when you were talking about the Beatles, like Paul McCartney, I think, said like he didn't want to learn too much music theory or learn how to read music or something because it would take the magic out of it. And there is like a magic. And sometimes when you learn something too well, you start to just see the techniques. If you like get into filmmaking, you start to like notice the panning that makes you feel emotional when it gets in on the, and you're thinking about that instead of like the movie and the moment, So it's nice to have that.
It's tough as to not to become like a master or anything, and not for that to sound like too like boastful, but it's like anytime you spend a lot of time doing something, you understand like how basically how the sausage is made. Trying to find like new ways to like explore and let go of that. And I feel like Ableton, like I sound like a Ableton shill, and I am like to a little degree. I do have the the tattoo. It's
cool.
It's real. But I just feel like with 12 and then now with the auto shift, like a perfect example to kind of tie like a few things together here. Something I ran into last week was using on some sound, like I have like a Discord, and I think it's probably linked some here, like on this like episode, whatever. But we've been doing this like sample flip challenge like every week, where like we basically on Mondays get a sample, and then everybody gets to like do their own flip. And I challenged everybody a couple weeks ago to make everything from a snare sample. So you had to have bass, you had to have chords, you had to have like drums and stuff, but it had to in some way. You had to extract that like from this like snare sample. So was just doing a bunch of things, like trying to get some stuff going. And I ran into this thing of like, if you put a flanger or a phaser and crank like the feedback up, and you basically get it to do the whining thing where it goes all the way up and then all the way down. So if you do that like with a sound, but then put the auto shift after it to basically quantize those notes and then freeze and flatten that, and then do a slice to MIDI and then use the seed generator, and you could basically, like, I made a whole like basically a melody line like out of those like pieces. And again, that's like another like fun thing. I've never like done that before, like thought about doing that. But
Yeah.
again, now that like auto shift is like built in and you have the scale awareness and all that, it like opens up these new like wrong techniques that you can somehow mangle into an actual, thing.
Yeah. That's where it gets exciting for me, is when you start using things the wrong way.
Yeah.
In the Berkeley class that I teach, it's a sampling class too. So similar stuff. Like one of the big things that we talk about is like warping. And warping is like meant to keep your stuff in time when you change tempo with limited artifacts and all that. But if you warp something too far, it gets all grainy and weird. And that's actually what we're after in the sampling class, because you get all these cool textures, and the thing that's wrong can actually be what's right.
Yeah.
So now, like, yeah, with like, I didn't even think of that, with like that annoying like flanger whine, like you said, is kind of the best way to put it. It's kind of a terrible sound, but if you start tuning it, then okay, now it gets interesting, and that's like some of the fun now with having that as a native effect, like the auto shift, which is their auto tune. I'm so much more likely to pop it in.
Yeah.
Especially if I'm on push now, standalone push, which I've really gotten lost now, and having the mic in there, and they made a couple other nice changes to push where it's a little bit more fun on its own, and you can get lost in there.
Yeah, I feel like because are you on the beta? You must
Yeah.
be like on the beta. Yeah, I feel like that the 12.1 beta, like for push, it's like the push is actually now this is like it's the beginning of like the final form of like the push 3, because I feel like before then there was there's still like a lot that you could do with it. There's some like crucial things that were like missing, and that made it like kind of annoying to like work on at times. But it feels like now it's like you're starting to see like, as like a standalone Ableton device, it's like really it's upped just the usability and the fun ability, about it too.
Yeah, like to have that stuff baked in is really nice. I guess that takes time. It's almost like developing your own workflow as a musician. They probably needed to see how people were using it. They probably had to play with it. They probably had to get feedback, and then like, oh yeah, we should definitely change that. Like, how come I can't,
move a track?
ARM exclusive? Like some of the simple features, or like the auto select on launch, that was like really difficult on push.
Yeah.
If you're trying to do something and then you stop a clip and then that track gets selected, it's like, oh, come on. Like now my recording is lost. And I guess you just sort of need to go through it. And it's something I've been really picking up on myself with just writing, even like, and I heard it somewhere and it just like clicked. It's like writing is really reacting to what you've just written. And same thing with like making a song, like I have to do something first. I can't sit around and think about it. And I do that so often, like, what am I going to do today? I'll just make this. But so often my song ideas come when I'm trying to like make a pack and I'm working on a sound, and it's like, this is cool. And,
whoa, okay.
And I get distracted from the job of making the pack, and now I'm doing that. Or you just playing around with noise, and now, oh yeah, you have to like be using your hands and making it, and you can't just like plan it out in your head. Like,
never. It never works.
There's too much unknown. Like there's nothing there yet.
Yeah.
Just the other day, my wife and I went to this place in our town where you can select like a piece of pottery. Like it's just a blank white piece of pottery, like mug or a bowl. We picked bowls, and then you paint it, and you make whatever design you want. Then they fire it, and you get it back like a week later. And I didn't know what the heck I was gonna do. but I had to just start doing something. As soon as I started, I was like, oh, okay, all right, I see where, like I couldn't just conceptualize it. And she did the same thing. I was like, well, let me just try this. And then once you try this, okay, now I can do this to go with that. And so much of that is like how we write,
Yeah. Well, you need something for there to be like something else. Like you need to, even if it's just like a sine wave, like, okay, well, now that we have that, like, let's start to shape it in a way, or let's bring in another sound to like contrast with that. Like there has to be it's like there has to be more than like one part or like one piece, and you got to start with something like two. And I think, for me, like I was never interested like in the push like workflow before, like with the push one or push two. Like I used them a little bit like in the studio, but when they announced like the standalone thing, I was like, okay, like this is like actually like something. And I think because like at the time I went down the modular rabbit hole, and the gear, the DAW-less whole thing, like went all in like big time. And it was fun. But when I saw like the Push 3 standalone, I was like, okay, like it's time to like get serious. And I basically got rid of all the modular stuff, and I'm kind of just back to like using Ableton. But a big part of that is like just being able to interact with like Ableton devices in a different like interface and away from the computer. Because like you don't make the same decisions that you do when you can see, like the entire, everything, the gray abyss as I call it. And I'm finding like just things that I didn't even know like existed before, like the dry clip on Ableton's Echo. I never knew that was like a thing, and that you could basically use the Echo as like a mini like distortion or like saturation, thing. And also like getting into like learning operator and FM stuff. So I think having, basically you have Ableton, but it's in a much smaller thing. You can't really get to everything too, which I think is also kind of like a plus for like the writing process, because you're limited to what you can do, but everything that you can do in there, it's all with the same, devices and stuff that you've, like used before. So I think it's been a hard sell for a lot of people, but like coming as like a, long time like Ableton user, it's been so fun and nice to just have something that doesn't have all your plugins and doesn't have like the internet. I mean, it has the internet, but you know what I mean? You can't like...
Yeah, you're not going on YouTube or wherever, social media.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing, which is what I always tell people when they're asking, like, hey, should I get a Push 3? Or, do you suggest like the MPC stuff or, the Electron stuff? And like I always tell people, if you're using Ableton, like the real selling point, at least for me, is the ability to make something on it, on the Push 3, and then instantly get it into Ableton, where with any other piece of gear, regardless of what it is, that like transfer process is just never straightforward. Like regardless of what, even with like an outboard like synth, like you got to set up the MIDI or you got to play it and then you got to record it in, if you have an idea. Whereas like if you do something on the Push, you can literally, you can just like transfer it, like instantly, and it comes up like as like a session and everything. So I like the idea of it being something away from the computer, but then you can still bring it to the computer if you want to do that. And that process is pretty, painless.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big hiccup with a lot of gear. Just how do you then get it to the next stage?
Yeah. And that kills, for me at least, that kills creativity. And like that little bump of like, okay, like I really like this, like where it is now, but now I'm going to spend a half an hour or, even 5 minutes of trying to get it in. And then once it's in, now for some reason it's like something different, or there was some, break and flow to where now that it's here, I'm like, well, now I don't know, I'm not really, maybe we'll try, blending this around a little bit. And then it's like, it just kind of goes to shit from there.
I'm hypersensitive to anything that's even the smallest interruption to that flow, because it doesn't take really anything to ruin it for you, like a couple seconds. I mean, it seems so silly, like when I say it, I sound like such an idiot, but I've got like these Siri compatible outlets in here now, and it used to be I come down and there's like 4 power surge switches I have to turn on. What is that? You know, are we talking like 20 seconds maybe? But putting them on that thing and then just to be able to ask, I don't want to say it because it's going to turn off everything, but to tell that assistant to tell her to turn all this stuff on is so nice. And it is probably the difference sometimes between doing it and not doing it. Mm-hmm. So there have definitely been times I noticed myself just being like, well, you know what, I'm not going to turn on the speakers. I'm just going to, I'll just, it's literally like get up and take 3 steps and push a button. But there's something about that, you know, because I guess if you have enough of those 5 to 10 second interruptions.
Oh, they add up.
Yeah. And if you add all that up over the course of a year, which this is like a really depressing thing I've gotten into, is evaluating like how much time I really spend doing things. Like, how much time do I spend commuting to work? You know? Oh, like in my career, I'm going to spend like 3 years in a car driving or something like that. And you're just like, what? But adding up those small 30-second interruptions, even like, you know, using like the search for the browser to find something and type it in, that saves you 10 seconds every time you add a device. You're getting like sessions back. You're getting like days of work back every year if you do that stuff. Mm-hmm. And you're also getting a lot of, you're avoiding a lot of those little hiccups that make you lose the flow and the inspiration.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to echo that, no pun intended, but using default Ableton, you know, devices for me, at least, and spending more time building, you know, whether it's templates or, you know, effects and stuff like effect racks or presets, of what I would describe as like foundational things that like I know I'll kind of need, kind of regardless of what type of, you know, track I'm working on, or even what kind of like session it is, even if it's like a play session, like I'm going to need, you know, a kick drum or something like that. Or, and yeah, all of that's just to get to the thing like faster, or just like maybe it's like preparing yourself to come to the thing in a better mood, or like in a better like state of being, like to get to like the flow state, as opposed to like dealing with a bunch of, you know, technical shit where you're then like frustrated, or that might bring up like other drama and trauma like in your life. And then if you do even come across like the inspiration, like you're not in a, you know, mental or like spiritual state to be able to like accept and continue to move forward like with that, you know, idea. So, and I think that differs for everybody, but that is like a big thing of just coming into the space like open and, you know, free flowing, if you will. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't know.
It does, because it's a fragile state. I like to think of inspiration like you have water in your hands. And like if you don't drink it, it slips through your fingers, and it doesn't take long. Like you have to act on it, and you if I need to like reach for something while I got that water in my hands, I just very easily lost most of it. So any kind of interruption it's all a challenge, and you know, just being prepared for that stuff. And I try to notice when I get caught up in things like that and correct it, so that, you know, I'm just ready for it when it happens. That helped a lot. Playing in a band, you know, I play with like a 3-piece rock band, and we got like, as we've been playing more and more, and just every time we practice, I try to like, you know, make it a little bit easier to slip right into stuff, to have like a template that'll record. I just open it up and hit record, and we're going. Like, it's not a production. Like all the inputs are labeled so that I know what's what. And otherwise, like stuff doesn't get done. It's just so easy to not do something.
There's way more ways to not do something than there are to actually do something. Because doing something means you commit to a certain like path, you know what I mean? Whereas like to not do something, limitless options on which way to go that way, you know?
Yeah, and they're all in this fantasy state, and they're all magical and perfect. And they can even like coexist. Like I could do this and that, like things that are impossible to happen at the same time happen in the realm of possibility. But as soon as you decide, even if it's just like, I'm going to use this snare drum sound, now you've cut off the entire universe of possible perfect snare drums for this imperfect one you've picked.
Yeah. I like to describe and like tell students like when they're kind of starting out and just understanding the lay of the land and how things work and how your ability to just knowing what you need to go to do something, or even like where the track volume is, like how that's different from the track on and off, whatever. Is describing it to them in a way that it's like you're basically trying to get to a place where your like the thinking or like talking part of your brain doesn't have to think or talk in your head about what you're doing. You just do it because it's already like, I don't know, it's already mined information that you have. So there's no reason to be like, okay, I want to go turn the volume down and that means I need to like go here. It's like you want as much of that stuff to already kind of be like, in the system, like in your brain, so that then you can focus on and like be open to, again, like exploring or, just getting done like what you want to get done, as opposed to getting lost in the weeds of the, whether it's arranging or just where things are, routing, like and whatnot. But that is like a big hurdle. I mean, for anybody, even no matter how long you've been doing it, because there's just so much like within any program, but especially Ableton, like there's just so many rabbit holes to fall down and things to try and different ways to do the same thing. And it's a lot.
Yeah, like which one of these things is the volume? To just know that. It's, I guess, like when you learn to ride a bicycle, you're thinking about all that stuff, but then, you get on it after some time and you just ride it. When my grandmother got a computer, it was like, I don't know, 2010 maybe. And she never had a computer before, and she wanted to like go online, Facebook, email, whatever. I told her, okay, Grandma, like click on that icon over there. She's like, click?
An icon.
Like,
click. Even stop to click. Wow.
Well, she didn't even know that if you move the mouse, this arrow on the screen is where you pick things and you press a button to select it. Like stuff that you just, we just know because we grew up around this stuff. But things like you said, like the volume, like you just know it because you've done it 7 billion times by now. But that first time, like I'm in arrangement view, how do I do the volume here? Where is it? And if you're caught up in that all the time, it's really hard to stay in like any kind of flow. And I think if you can do that to yourself even after your experience by getting too much new stuff at once, or changing your session around, remapping your controls or something. Like doing that before a show is always a bad idea.
Oh God.
Like this doesn't do what you thought it did anymore. You got to learn that.
Yeah. And I think for me and where I'm at, and coming from doing, the modular stuff and like outboard gear, and all of that, like I got to almost like this like claustrophobic like state, like in the studio of like, oh, I want to like make something, but now like there's all these extra things kind of crowding my, space and my creative space, as well, like mental and also like physical, that I'm enjoying more of the like keeping things as simple like as possible, and like the focus that kind of like brings to like what you're like working on. And then also, I mean, a big thing again in Ableton 12, like the freeze and flatten in one click thing, like for me personally, is like so huge. I think that's got to be my favorite feature because it just allows like to get something going and then just immediately like freeze and flatten. Because like that, then there's nothing else. Like I can play with it again with effects and stuff, or do the slice to MIDI stuff. But as far as like tweaking and getting lost in that whole thing, it's like no, just like commit and then let's like move on and like go, to something else. So it's just interesting the journey of being like a creative person. Like there's you start out, you're just like learning like a few things, like we were talking about the guitar pedals and everything, and then you acquire certain pedals and then that leads into this and that, and then before you know it, you have this amazing like huge studio, but then it's like, oh, it's too much to manage, and then things start to get like smaller, and then you come back to just like just being the guy in the bedroom, working with what you have. And I don't know, I've been really enjoying that. And again, that's why like push 3 has been so fun of like, okay, I don't have any VSTs. I don't have access to any of that stuff. Like, let's figure out a different way, to do it, or play with something that I've never like played with. Like again, in all the years using Ableton since version 7, the only thing I ever used operator for was what used to be called the hip hop sub bass, RIP. That is now the basic sub sign.
Yeah.
But in the last like 6 months, I've just been diving into it and like not fully understanding, like what's going on, but like getting some really like, again, like exploring again, something that's been there the entire time that I've just never, really looked at. And the same with the analog synth in Ableton. It's another one that I've been playing with recently. And it's like, dude, we already have all the building blocks to make just about like anything. It's just a matter of figuring out what the process and ingredients are to get to that, sound and everything.
Yeah. Well, that was big for me when I had all those plugins. I had spent months like just getting whatever I could. And I had all this stuff and I didn't know how to use any of it. I had like this really surface understanding of all of it. As soon as I got rid of it and started digging in, then I really learned stuff. And I learned like, oh, this is how a compressor works. This is what it does. Instead of like just some fancy, emulation or something like that, not understanding why I would even want that. And it lets you go deep on the stuff that way.
Yeah. And I think too, I've been thinking a lot about this recently again, because in my Discord, there's so many kids that are on like FL Studio. And like, if you look visually at FL Studio, it's very like, it looks cool. Like, and like the UI is like different colors and it's like this shiny, thing. And all their instruments have these like really cool names. And it's like, if you come to Ableton, again, it's the gray abyss. Like there's nothing visually stunning. There's literally nothing visually stunning like in Ableton. I can't really think of any one thing that even the spectrum, like, or the spectrum that's on EQ8 like does not look nice. Like, but I think the benefit of that is there's got to be, and I don't know what the data is on this, but there's got to be something to where your ears may be more in tune with less visual feedback of what's going on. Like your brain is processing less visually. And so you may be able to like hear better, maybe not better, but maybe you have more like bandwidth for like hearing and creating. And that's one thing I've really come to like love about Ableton is how boring the interface is and how just everything is the same to where like, yeah, it's just not, I'm not thinking about like, wow, how like, look how cool like that looks. But then when you do use some like VST or something or some, effect, it's like, especially nowadays, like the user interfaces and like just the UI designs are like so cool, looking. And there's definitely something to that of, even as I'm sure it's like you sit down at a synth that just like looks cool. You like feel cool, like go into it and be like, yeah, I'm going to, do like the Van Halen.
Look at this thing. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think there's got to be something too, like not getting as much like visual feedback and that like allowing, again, I think just more bandwidth for listening and hearing. Maybe. I don't know.
I think so. because when I was downloading all those plugins, when I was using Logic even, every device was like a new spaceship I had to learn. All like a knob is different now, you know? But I mean, you have the knob tattoo on your arm, right? So like a knob, that's how they look in live. End of story. And you can recognize them. And it made me see like, oh, that's a filter, and that's a filter in that sense. And they all have filters, and these envelopes. Oh, I get it now. It's not just this like mysterious like lever inside this other spaceship that I was trying to figure out how to fly.
Yeah.
And I was able to see the individual components so much easier with just some uniformity. Like, yeah, it was maybe not as exciting, but it was familiar.
Mm-hmm.
I like that a lot.
And I, like, after doing it, for at least for me, after doing like the modular thing and getting into like that world and just understanding patching like in like the physical form, I think coming back to Ableton after that has opened up some new ways of like seeing and like thinking about Ableton more in that like modular way, especially with all like the, you know, the LFO and even the new or the updated like envelope follower, and there's like obviously some other stuff, but it's all just pieces and little ingredients, and there's ways to arrange those pieces to do basically whatever, you know, you can dream up, because everything's so bite-sized, like in Ableton, like the, you know, like what used to be, again, RIP, the simple delay that is now just the delay. Like that, like I've been playing a lot with that recently and just learning like, okay, like a delay can be many, many things, or it can interact with many different things, you know, depending on where it's at in the chain and what you have fed into it and where it like goes from there. And yeah, it's just interesting, like after, you know, for so long, like using, you know, the same like software and same like plugins to then like, I don't know, just see things in a different light and just start to see the individual pieces and what those actually mean in the context of like a bigger system or a bigger like, you know, patch or effect rack, whatever it may be. And yeah, it's just wild.
Yeah, how you can do that. And like I think like something like your sample challenge with make a song with a snare really forces you to figure out what you can do with all that stuff. Like you said, would you have tried that flanger thing with the auto shift if you could have just opened up something else that would have had you halfway there, or at least like playing melodies already?
Yeah, definitely not. And like because kind of like the way that we do the sample challenges is that like I like stream on Twitch like Mondays and Wednesdays, and basically that's me doing like the sample challenge like on my own, and you know, showing like how I would go about it, you know, depending on what the sample is. But with that snare one, like I was telling everybody, it's like my process, like at least, is like thinking about it more like a scientist of like, okay, we have this like whole sound, so you could think about that as like a, I don't know, like a structure, like a planet or whatever. And basically what we need to do is just like break it down to the atoms. Like we need to break it down to like where we can get a wave out of it that then we could use, you know, somewhere else. And that was one of the challenges, is like, well, I want to use the vocoder to, you know, kind of repitch like, you know, this sample after it's in granulator. And it's like, well, in order to do that, like we need something to send, you know, into the vocoder to repitch things. So we need, you know, a wave of some sort that's tuned like properly, you know, which honestly with any sound, it's like pretty easy to do. You put it in a simpler or a sampler and just make it small enough and then tune it, you know, freeze and
like all the way.
Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting that again, with, as long as you have a sound, could even be noise, you can generate anything from that. It's just about, again, pulling it down to its like the smallest bit. And then once you have that, that's where you can just start to build, you know, like everything from it. And it's weird that music is like that.
Yeah.
Or sound.
I never thought of it that way. like atoms, right? The building blocks of matter.
Yeah.
How you
Well, it is
can,
like in a synth, like, you know, like a wavetable synth or even like a, you know, digital synth. It's so you have a, you know, single cycle wave
Hmm.
and then you're just pitching it in a certain way. And then from there, like everything else kind of happens. Same with like noise. Like,
Yeah. That's a fun way to think of it, though. It's almost like the the construction of the universe, like you said. Like it's this atom that you're now changing, and it's like reproducing in a new way to create
yeah.
something else bigger and different. Um, but it all comes from that smallest piece. Just then some imagination, you
Yeah.
know,
Some reverb.
maybe some spice. Yeah, exactly.
Just give it something to bounce off of, really. It's like put it in a, you know, put it in a space and
Mm,
let it bounce. And
yeah. Yeah, it's weird because I guess because you can go and get you know, loops. Say you go to Splice, you can just grab like 7 loops and have a track,
mhm.
and those are like kind of these full form things. Or you can kind of go more the opposite way and just start from scratch with just a waveform and see where it takes you.
Yeah.
Mm,
And, you know, again, with teaching people, and some people come from that, you know, I think a lot of people come from it like nowadays of like you were just describing, like grabbing, you know, handful of loops from Splice and you kind of arrange it and then that's like your like song.
mm,
But there needs to be, for better or worse, there needs to be, I think in any like valuable or worthwhile creative endeavor, like you need to struggle and be challenged along the way to then feel at the end of it, or even while you're working on it and while things start to like happen and sound good to you, like that is the return on investment of hitting that challenge and struggling. And like when you're just pulling stuff, even presets for that matter, like presets on Serum or whatever it is, like it might sound great, but then like at the end of the day, at least for me, I know for me, if I do stuff where it's all just like samples and yeah, it might sound great, but at the end of the day, I'm like, well, what did I really do? Like, where's my like
yeah,
voice in this? Like, this wasn't hard, you know, to
right.
do. So I don't really love it or like identify with it, like at the end of the day. So I think, yeah, imposing some sort of like, it's kind of like just like exercising or like lifting weights. Like you can't just be lifting 10 pounds, you know, and do 10
Mm,
reps every day and be like, yeah, like I worked out today and it was great. Like you got to
yeah,
keep kind of adding to
no
that or
growth without that
yeah,
challenge.
yeah, switching it up or trying new things. And yeah, because I mean, I think that's when like the best stuff happens, at least for me, is like just challenging myself to do something different. And whether it happens on that try or like, you know, a year down the line where that process like is re-embedded in my brain as I'm like messing with stuff and then all of a sudden like something happens and I'm like, wow, this is like great and I have no idea how it happened, but we
Mm,
got here.
yeah, we figured it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, without that challenge, nothing improves. You don't develop. And it got me thinking again about painting the bowls. um, they had, and to me, this is almost like your sample off a Splice. They had these stamps, you know, like kind of like cute
Mm-hmm.
little things you could like dip in the paint and then just kind of like press them against the bowl. And it would have been really nice, clean.
Mm-hmm.
I know I wouldn't have, I've almost like wouldn't have cared, you
Yeah.
know, but instead, like what I decided to do was like paint our dogs, like little like
You know,
versions of our dogs that took a long time, you know, and rough around the edges. But I know like I like it way better. If I could have got a dog, maybe even a dog that looked like our dogs and just
mm-hmm.
kind of stamped it on there, but then it was like, hmm,
Yeah.
okay, cool, I did that. But yeah, like same thing with music. If I'm so much happier with like a beat that I came up with than if I use a loop, and it's just kind of, yeah, it sounds great. I mean, it's awesome. And I guess you could look at like AI too, that kind of stuff. Like you can generate really good sounding music. So what? It's kind of
Yeah.
like how it feels at the end, you know? Like maybe you'll laugh, but kind of so what? Like the personal satisfaction is just so much greater. I don't know if it will be any cooler to anyone else, but I have a feeling like the bowl that I painted compared to the one I could have done with stamps, I think if somebody saw it, they'd be like, oh, that's cool. You know, it's like, it's got character.
Yeah, interesting interpretation.
Yeah, like, yeah, it's you're not an artist, I guess, but
He's on his way.
it's kind of cool that you made that. But
Yeah.
with music now, so much like what is good, you know, what is a good production? Sometimes that's so subjective. Like you got like so much music that's very lo-fi now. It's very popular, and it's almost easier to make the slick stuff by just dragging those samples in, and
Yeah.
man, that sounds really slick. Though every one of those samples is like
It's perfect.
worked out perfectly and processed right where it needs to be. I don't really have any interest in doing that myself. But that's something nice about fighting for it a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
even if it comes out a little bloodied.
Yeah, well, it's like
scars.
It's like the difference of getting a like a meal kit from like HelloFresh or Blue Apron or whatever. It's like the difference of that, which sure you can make a great meal. It can be convenient. You and your partner can just have a lovely evening and still have time, watch Netflix, whatever it is, watch the murder show. Or, which obviously this takes a lot more time, but if you had your own farm and were basically you grew all of those ingredients, you raised the cattle, whatever it is, and then made that same meal with all of those ingredients. Like if you could somehow measure the like dopamine as well as just the overall like sense of well-being, like I imagine the the farmer, even though they would be very tired, I'm sure would much more enjoy that meal.
We get HelloFresh, and it's convenient, it's nice, it kind of tells you what to do, and you can enjoy yourself on that level, right? But whenever my wife makes them, she's always modifying it somehow. She does, and it's always so much more fun when she does that. And to go even further, I'm not a big gardener. I want to be, like, kind of somewhere in me, but I'm not. But I have in the past grown some vegetables and used like the compost from our food garbage. And there was a day where I think it was like a cucumber or a tomato or something, and I was eating and I was like, wow, like this thing is like the wastes from our food was put into the dirt, and we grew this thing and ate the part of it, and it's going to go back in the compost. And it was just like, holy cow, like circle of life kind of moment. And like, I'm part of this thing now, instead of like just kind of being here on the planet. I am the planet, like it was this like universal experience of like oneness that was really cool. And, it might sound funny, but the dopamine for that, whatever it was, carrot or tomato or cucumber, that was like one of the most enjoyable vegetables I ever ate.
Well, yeah, like having a process, behind it and a story, even if like, and that might be where, because music like is so subjective, and people are going to hear certain things that, like, even if it is just a bunch of splice samples put together, like that they might like and connect with, and that's like fine. But as like a way to kind of measure things, I think as the person who's making music, like you yourself will have a better reaction, or at least like a more, maybe a deeper reaction when doing, like you were just describing with gardening, with like making music, of like really pushing yourself and gathering these ingredients. And even if you do use some splice stuff, like transforming that into something completely different, like that's something you could really like take pride in and like feel good about. And I think that that also translates into, I've had this theory like forever. It's like you may be on the same page, but I feel like with music, there's something that kind of gets like transmuted and like coded into the music of like your mind space, like at the time that you're working on it. And like when you do find those real free flowing, flow states, or brought just like love and energy to a track or an album or whatever, that those are the thing that like people, when they listen to that, even if they can't like recognize it, like pick up on that or connect with that like in some way.
Yeah.
So I think that process of whatever the process is, just having a process that is, challenging, unique to you, that allows you to make something like out of that you put, work into in your own like touches. Like if you're doing that and feeling like accomplished and everything, that will translate, to the listener in some way, again, whether they're conscious of it, or not.
I think so. I think that's real. Like your enjoyment somehow, it gets into the music. It might not be obvious, but I think you feel it. I think it's kind of like when you're talking to somebody on the phone and they're smiling when they talk. You don't see that, but you pick up on it.
Yeah.
We recognize that, and you can tell if somebody's talking to you like with a really angry face. And
Yeah.
even if it's not apparent what they're saying is angry, like something comes across that is a little bit hard to quantify, but there's like a life in there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, especially when you're making like electronic music, on a computer, it's hard to verify that that is taking place, like that's getting, coded into the music, even if there's nothing that you have directly like recorded into, the song. But I still feel like I don't know, there's at least all of the songs that I've had that have been semi-successful, it's all ones that like, there was something very real about the process of making it, and I was like tuned in while doing it, where things that I might have been frustrated as I was working on, and to me, might sound great, and have its place, like people just don't like connect with, that stuff. So I think, we can't prove it yet with modern science, but one of these days.
Yeah, and I think with like the AI stuff I've heard, that's not there. Like you can AI song, Brian Wilson sings, Bon Jovi or whatever you want. Maybe a better example exists than Bon Jovi, but it's like, I don't care. Like when I hear it, it's like amusing.
It's fun for a minute.
I'm never even gonna finish it, really. Like Frank Sinatra sings Nirvana, like, okay, that's kind of funny to hear, but if he really sang it, I'd be like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like, what's he gonna do with it? But he didn't. It's like that part of it's not there.
Yeah.
I hope that's real. I think it is. I just feel like, maybe like you said, there's been too many experiences where you could just hear like we were having fun when we made that. It was a good time. And I think I picked up on that kind of stuff a lot while playing like my more electronic music live, where I'd have like clips and I'd arrange them on the fly and sing over and then play some instruments over it. And it kind of surprised me that even though those clips were the same ones every night, something was different depending on how I was or how the crowd was. Like, and I'd listen back and like, this was a good night.
Yeah.
And this wasn't. And there's almost nothing that's really different. But it's just like those little things, those outside things that don't really even exist in the recording.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a weird thing of having. So you have a DJ set or whatever, and you play it one night here. Obviously, there's certain transitions might be different, but this first night just not a great set, right? And you say it's like it's not a great set. It's going to be the same set. You go play a different place, something else. There's something in the room or with who's there, like that human ping ponging of energy that happens like at a show, and then it might be like the best show like ever. But again, it's like roughly the same set, and then again you go to the next place and it's a bad set, like again, but it's the same set.
It's like I was in a better mood that night. And
Yeah. Or something.
with a
Yeah.
band, it's harder because you could say like, the bass player was off tonight, or the sound of the PA was weird, or whatever it was. Like you can kind of, there's too many like variables to really know. But when you know that that's the same audio file,
Yeah.
going over and over,
Weird.
and there's like a different sort of energy going on. The magic wasn't there tonight.
Yeah. It's very strange and frustrating sometimes, like as a performer.
Yeah. You have to be all in, you got to be enthusiastic. Like that's always something I've tried to recognize in playing, is that like you can't not bring it. Like you got to turn it on, and you're really dictating like the energy for everybody else. You have this like kind of like magic weapon of energy with having all this sound power.
Yeah.
And I mean, there have been shows with bands that I've played that really weren't very good, but we had a good time, and people enjoyed it. Or where we played really well, but like, I don't know, we were nervous, we were uptight about it. It's almost secondary sometimes how well you actually play compared to your attitude about how you played.
Yeah. I mean, you gotta start the fire, like for the show. Like you can obviously feed off of like the audience, but it's like there's a certain thing that has to happen before they're gonna give you the energy like back. You almost have to like prove to the crowd that like I'm here and we're doing this, like, and this is gonna be like a good time. You have to like make people feel like comfortable in that way and like start the fire so that they could partake. And like that's when a show is like really good, when you can feel that like immediately, or you just push to that place as quickly as possible and get everybody in, and then from there you can just go to the moon with that sort of a vibe and feeling.
Well, I imagine you've played for some pretty seriously large crowds. Do you find that there's like a sweet spot? Does it get too big that it's almost hard to connect, or does it is there something else in the air?
I think even big crowds can be good, but for me personally, I've always enjoyed the smaller venue type thing. Again, just being able to like, it's more of like an eye contact thing. I think of if you can make eye contact with almost everybody in the room, like I don't know, because you can lock eyes with somebody when they're like feeling it, and then you like point to them like, yeah, you know what's going on, like you get it,
Right.
and then that amps them up. And if you could do that, throughout the set to like, a bunch of other people, I feel like that, I don't know, there's a real like community like feeling to that where, and you can still do that. You can get away with the same thing at like a big show, but again, like you got to be able to like reel them in and make them feel comfortable enough to like, pop off on their own. And I feel like I don't really have the language to like describe what I'm trying to describe like at the moment, but like, you have to like do something, or like, I don't know, just make them feel comfortable enough to like be there and like let loose and, give their energy. Like you have to be willing to give your energy to let them know that they're safe to like, give their energy back. And then if you can do that, which I think is a little bit harder in bigger places, but again, it can also be like a domino effect in big places where if you can connect with a few people in the audience and then they're able to like then spread out, it's almost like energy fields, right? You're connecting with
Right.
this person, and then once they're connected, then their bubble gets bigger, and then everybody else kind of like goes from there. But yeah, it always depends on, there's, like you were saying earlier, there's so many different factors like to a live show and whether it's good or bad.
Hmm. Yeah, and I guess there's so much more space too, dividing you from the people at a larger place. A lot of I mean, I've never like been in that kind of situation, but a lot of my favorite shows were like when we're on the floor and they're on the floor right here,
Mm-hmm.
and because like you're right there,
Yeah.
and you're in your face, and like that's just like you can't deny that when that's working in
Mm-hmm.
those situations. It's just too, it's too close. It's too much energy, like in one spot.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and again, just making people feel like they're a part of what's happening and like validating. I mean, not to go too deep on it, but it's like you're validating their existence right there in that moment, and like looking to them, be like yes, like we're here. This is happening. It's, you could be as
Hmm.
loud as you want. You could dance however crazy you want. Like that's what we're like here, to do. And yeah, in smaller places like that, if you can get to that place with everybody that's there, like there's really nothing better than that and
Hmm.
that feeling.
What year was it about when like all this like you get like your Kill Paris days, and when that kind of like hit off for you, like where like was there
It was
some
like,
kind of build up and like some stuff happened that forced that into action?
well, I had moved to LA like in 2000. I think it might have been like the end of 2010 or 2011. Um, it was teaching and stuff, but also just like working with, because I had kind of always played in bands, and had lived in Nashville like prior to that, and played bass and like some country groups and stuff, and just kind of doing every odd music job that was kind of like available, while never, because again, back in that day, like there weren't, 2008, 2009, there wasn't a lot of examples of like solo artists, like even DJs, I feel like here in the US, because like DJs didn't really start to become like mainstream, or you didn't start to like see that stuff until like the mid like 2000s, like really like in places that you could actually like get to.
Hmm.
Um, so I think they're just kind of hit a point where I was like, you know what? Like, just gonna start doing my own thing. Like, I'm gonna give myself permission to just like do my own thing. And I started doing that while I was in LA, while I was also working with some other guys in this like group that we were doing. And then just started, SoundCloud, like releasing stuff, doing these like bootleg remixes. And then Skrillex actually like messaged me on SoundCloud and was like, dude, he's like, I've been like playing some of your tracks, like would love to, chat, or, release something. And it was actually funny. The day that I got that message, it was hilarious, because I went to like, I had a lesson, and like I used to like drive to people's houses like in LA, like, because I was just trying to make money like any way that I could. And I was like, I'll come to
Fun
you.
place to
Like,
drive, right?
yeah, I'll come to you for like $50, whatever, an hour. Like, let's do it. So I went to this guy's house in, it was like Pacific Palisades, I think, really rich spot. Like this, he was like a younger guy, and his parents just, paid for whatever. And I was really hungover from the night before. And it was just like a really bad lesson, like with this, guy who didn't really have any interest like in doing music, it seemed like, or just, I don't know, like wanted something else. And it was just like a rough day. And I kind of came home like feeling like, dude, what the fuck am I doing? And
Mm.
then I opened up my SoundCloud, and it's like Skrillex. And I'm like, is this real? Like, what is happening right now? Like, this can't be like the real thing. And I checked his page and everything. It's like, oh no, it was like him. So that kind of from there, that's kind of like what set everything off. And I had kind of started doing shows a little bit like around like LA. But yeah, then from there, like just started doing tours. I like my first, we did like the Ausla tour, which was, it was like In Machine, Kill the Noise, Um, there's some other people in that. I think that Monsta, who now I don't know if they're still making music, but I Am Monstas, I think is what their thing was. But yeah, there's just a handful of like the early like Owsla people, and then my first like real tour was with Zed on his first like U.S. tour. We did U.S. and Canada, and then from there, like touring with Big Gigantic and all that stuff. Yeah, so it kind of it was weird. It was a weird like a leap of faith type of like time like in my like life because I was working at Sweetwater before and had finally just got the position like in the store, and if I wanted to I could have just stayed there and kind of continued to work and eventually get commission and like make like loads of money kind of, but like I would have been in Indiana where I grew up, which I graduated high school early to get out of Indiana, like to leave and go to college, for recording and engineering and everything. So yeah, once I started to like tour, it was like it just meant a lot to me because I had taken all these chances to like make something happen and it actually like, happened, which was, pretty awesome. Like I think.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, maybe I should go through my SoundCloud messages again, but I only get like hot babes that want to make me famous on some playlist. It's always like some bikini girl like, hey, I've been listening to your new tracks.
Yeah, I love the like
we want to
monetize your Facebook page. Like there's just so many weird spammy things. R.I.P. SoundCloud.
I guess that's I guess like there was a social aspect to it back then, where you did interact. I mean, I love that you can comment on spots on the audio and stuff and share things very easily, but that side of it is like for me non-existent anymore.
Yeah.
I get a lot of nonsense. I at this point, if I got that Skrillex email, I wouldn't believe it.
Well, there was a time again, it was because I remember when Spotify like became a thing, but it was like SoundCloud for, music producers. Like that was the spot. And there wasn't a ton of people really on it, but it was like a place you could upload something and then like you just meet people I think that's how I found your stuff like back in the day too, of like oh, here's like another like Ableton guy, and then also like the YouTube stuff again, it was just like a much smaller smaller group and less a lot less spam, like obviously a lot less like bots and stuff like that. So yeah, it sucks that has kind of gone away. Just that idea of having like music communities and stuff, places for people to go.
Yeah, well, I guess that's what you're doing though. You're trying to reclaim a bit of that you've got like that Discord and you've got the kind of like weekly challenge that pulls people in. I mean, I've been trying to do community stuff for a long time because it's so valuable. It's so nice. I mean, it's a lonely world sometimes, like sitting. It's so weird, right? Because like music used to be like you had to be with other people.
Yeah.
Even in my lifetime, it was like that. But now you can just like, you can do everything by yourself and never leave the house. And I am a kind of person that leans that way to begin with. Mm-hmm. So, but it's so important to find people like that you can talk to that, just understand this stuff a little bit. So that's a big reason why I do this podcast is you can talk to people. A lot of people in my life are very supportive and will, say good job, but they don't really know. Like we can't talk about like putting the auto shift after the the flanger, That's a very select few. So it's really nice to have, groups and communities you can talk to people, and I've learned a ton from it, just seeing what people are doing and sharing stuff. And that's a nice part too, is like to just share the work you're doing with other people that are like interested in that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I think, what I'm because that's kind of my like main like focus now is just like this Discord thing and in Twitch and building like basically kind of setting up like the community. And the way that I'm starting to think about it is kind of like a gym membership, but for producers, like in a way that we have these like tasks that we do, but also just having a space where people can, not only just be working on the same thing, because I think that's something that is really valuable about this like weekly sample challenge thing, is that we're all given the same like, resource of like, okay, we have this, one sample, let's like see what everybody, like does, but then also just a space where people they have something to do, which I think is also tough with music, like these days and being a producer. It's like you don't really know what you should be working on, or
what am I going to make today?
Yeah, and like where is it going? Yeah, and where is it going to go too? Because that's like another thing. People are like, well, how do I, share my music? How do I get my music out there? Because again, we grew up in the day that like all of the DSP stuff and SoundCloud and YouTube, all of that was so new that we had these. It's kind of the same tools that are around today. It's just there wasn't a huge audience, or there wasn't a bunch of like other things happening in those places, like YouTube as a perfect example of that. Like there wasn't like a ton of like product reviews like back then. There wasn't like you could find some like gear review stuff, but there wasn't like people reviewing like IKEA desks and chairs, where like now so much of YouTube is just this kind of review like thing. So that's what I'm trying to like make and like build right now. And we have like a great start to it. But it's been really fun to just have people who, there's people that submit every week. There's like new people that like come in. And it seems like everybody's enjoying just having a place to like, again, just building a little community around it and places for people to actually get their stuff heard, even if it's from like, 10 people. Like still, they like did something, they had something to focus on that week, and then, people get to hear it, they get feedback, and yeah, because I just think that's kind of missing like these days. Like it's so hard to like, as somebody starting out, I think it's got to be so hard to just feel comfortable on you made something and then now you're going to upload it. Even just getting to the upload part like can be like incredibly scary, because like obviously like we know the internet is a lot of things and sometimes not kind depending on what's going on, so it can be like scary, and there's all this comparing yourself to other people and all that. So that's kind of my work moving forward, I feel like, is just trying to build and curate a community to give people that like space and getting to give people things to do, like I had mentioned in like our email before this, is like, I'm really interested in finding ways to gamify like the production process and like music process. Cause I feel like that is something that's heavily lacking from like Ableton or FL Studio or anything like that. Like I would just love like a box that I could open that would say, you've been using Ableton like for this many days, like this amount, like how many times you've used like delay, or how many times you've used, EQ, how many exports you've done. It's just like a lifetime like thing, just to get some sort of feedback on like what you've, been doing. Cause you don't, it's a blessing and a curse, because you're just open to do whatever you want, however you want. But some sort of feedback I feel like would be great to just know, even if you had like, for each session, each track, like this many hours was spent like in this, session. So that's like how long it took you to do it. Like I just feel like some of those metrics would be really, really helpful for me. And also I feel like probably for other people as well.
Yeah. I think there's some Max for Live devices out there that'll tell you how long you've been working on a project. You kind of just drop it in and it keeps track of that. But what you're saying is a pretty cool idea, and almost like Snapchat has like streaks, and like I teach kids, so I see what they do on Snapchat a little bit, and they're just sending each other snaps. They're just sending each other snaps just to keep the streak going. And half the time it's like their forehead and the ceiling, and it's nothing. I've watched my nephew once, like he looked all stressed out. He's on his phone, like he's like 14. I'm like, what are you doing? Like consulting like the corporate headquarters here? Like you look really stressed out.
Stocks are not looking good today.
He's like, I got 77 snaps I got to send. I'm like, why? Like, I don't get it, but to them, it's important, you know?
Yeah.
Like, a lot of things are important to me that seem stupid to them. But to have that, like, could be really helpful. Like, you know, you've exported a track for the last 7 weeks in a row. Like, oh man, like, I got to do that. Or you haven't exported a track in 7 weeks and you haven't finished anything. And you've been compressing that snare drum for 14 hours.
Yeah,
just
or
to
like,
get a little
it'd be
screen time feedback.
Dude, this would be a great metric to have. That would be, I'm sure, baffling to so many people. But if you had a thing that showed you how many like unused samples are like in your library, which I'm sure that's a Max for Live device could definitely do that now that the browser in 12 is, you know, set up to analyze everything. But imagine like it's showing you, okay, how many projects you've made versus, you know, how many samples you have and how many of those samples have actually been used across those. I bet that would be a baffling number of how many unused samples and like audio files are on your hard drives.
Oh, it'd be kind of sick if you could set it up like you haven't used a sample in a year. Do you still want it?
Yeah.
Oh, I'd love that. I always fantasize about just like deleting everything and starting, because it's just, I'm dealing with the clutter of, you know, 15, 20 years of having a computer. Just the same operating systems, the files, you know, just kind of, all right, copy it to the new computer. Just some of the stupid decisions I made in those early days are still following me.
Yeah.
But that would be kind of cool, right? Like, just, you haven't opened this plugin in this long. What do you want to do?
Just some like, because it's like, I don't know if you play many video games, but like on PC or even on Mac, like Steam, which is the you know, for most PC games, like that's like the storefront that you like buy stuff from. And it tells you like you can arrange your library by like most recent played or like never played, and it shows you, you know, basically how many achievements you've gotten in that game, then how many hours you've played, you know, that game. And I feel like that, again, whether it could even be like, you know, effects and instruments, like telling you how often you've used, you know, this instrument or how many presets you've saved, you know, in this, like how many times you've opened Operator and, you know, use it. And I'm sure the data from there could get even, you know, more kind of like micro, in that it could be like, you know, the amount of tracks that you've exported that contain, you know, an Operator synth or that contain, you know, a flanger or a reverb and whatnot. I just feel like that would be really helpful and, you know, motivating, or at least like kind of give you the ability to see some data that would maybe make you make different decisions, in that you would be like, well, I haven't used the vinyl delay or the vinyl distortion, you know, in 8 months. Like maybe we should try something with that.
Fire that up. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love that, because it would make me make decisions. I would say, oh yeah, I haven't done that yet. I wanted to do that. I was so excited. And now, you know, like so many things, new features come out or devices. And I mean, man, even like just thinking about like those spectral blurs and the spectral resonator things that they got, like really excited about those and just kind of forgot.
Yeah.
You know, that would be fun. That's a great idea.
We just need
send
some
this
coders.
portion to somebody. Yeah,
somebody smarter than me, please.
Yeah. I don't want to work on it.
Figure it out.
I don't even know how to work on it. So,
yeah, it'd be great. Just something, just some sort of, just let us know what we're doing and what we're not doing, in ways to, because I feel like also for teaching, it would be so huge to have some sort of, you know, tracking leaderboard like system or something that, you could, I mean, imagine that. Imagine, because I'm kind of thinking like a fitness tracker of sorts, but for, production, or like for Ableton, where you could add, friends on it and see, they've exported out this many tracks, they've used this many instruments, whatever, they've spent this amount of time. Like, I feel like some of that stuff would be incredible, like in a classroom setting, or even like an online class would be incredibly, incredibly useful.
Yeah. Well, like you said, like the gym membership kind of thing, like if you've ever taken like an exercise class of any kind, and you're getting tired and you're like thinking, maybe I'll take a break. And then you look and like, they're all still, okay, I can't quit.
Yeah.
And they're probably, the other people thinking the same thing, like, oh, if he's not going to quit, I can't.
Yeah, I'm not going to quit.
Yeah, but you push yourself so much further.
Yeah.
There's something really nice about having other people involved and seeing like their progress too.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing like, well, if I just keep doing what they're doing.
Yeah, they can do it. I can do that. Like, I can do what they're doing.
Yeah, I've been doing the same stuff, so maybe I'm getting better too.
Yeah.
That's cool stuff. You've also got an Ableton Live intro course, right? So you've got to kind of get people in if they want to see that online. And the Discord is really cool. I love the sample challenge. It's awesome. I'm doing like a similar thing, a weekly music mission, where it's
I saw that. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's fun, and it gets me doing stuff sometimes. I should probably be more disciplined about it, but I think I spend too much time talking about making music, like we are.
You got to
right
be
now.
careful about that. Yeah. I found that when there was a stretch when I was during the modular sort of era, and also when I was teaching kind of the most, I was making a lot of YouTube videos, and then I came to realize I'm kind of just like talking about making music, but I don't actually, I'm not actually making like anything. So I think of this, this sample flip challenge thing, I was just thinking this the other day. I'm like, man, if we continue to do this, like at the very least, because on this last one that we did, like I have, because usually it's like the maximum of like 90 seconds, but we kind of changed the rules. I'm like, if you end up making a full song, like, yes, like that will count. And like with this one, I kind of taking it to like the final thing, and it's going to be something like I'm going to release. And so just having, again, exercises that lead to like finishing things, I think is like the ultimate, like goal, and a good way to like, again, if you can set things up to where like it helps other people, but also keeps you motivated, it kind of keeps you like disciplined and kind of put your ass on the line. Like, I think that's like really, that can be really good too, because you obviously want to finish music, too, and like be making stuff. And yeah, the content thing is like, I've struggled with that for years, of figuring out how to make content while also being able to make music, and how to blend those two and not having them separate, things like, oh, I'm going to make some content here, and then I can go and like make, the music.
Yeah. That's definitely part of it. That was like, because every year in January, we do the January thing where you make something every day, and it's a very productive time. And it's because everyone's doing it and you want to keep up, and I've done it 4 days in a row. I can't miss it now. And doing this weekly thing is another, like, every day is kind of unsustainable. At the end of January, you're like glad I don't have to do anything today.
I'm gonna take a break.
Yeah. But it does also prove to you that you can. So weekly is like, all right, that's not too bad. Can make something happen here. So I'm with you on that. I'm trying to do the same exact thing. Like, don't forget why I'm doing all this stuff. I'm making all these sounds. Like, I want to use them one day.
Yeah. Exactly. It's hard to keep track of that and keep focus of that. And, like today's, again, the content world. Because at the end of the day, at least for me, like, I'm never happier or more content than when I'm just making music. Like, the act in the process of making music, like, that is my favorite, thing, like, above anything. There's nothing else that really like compares to that, to me. So finding again, if you start doing all this other stuff on the other side that's taking away from like that and vice versa, it can like just kind of get messy and make you just kind of lose yourself like in it. So
Yeah.
I feel like that's a struggle for all of us like these days is, figuring all that out and how to navigate it and stay sane and stay like motivated and not burn out on it,
Yeah. Yeah, because it's something you're excited about. So you want to talk about it. You want to learn about it. And there's no shortage of stuff to learn. I mean, every single day I can open up my YouTube and find dozens and dozens of things to learn from and watch. But I've made it a point a little bit like I can't consume until I create. Like trying to do that. I'm not doing a really great job at following that, but better. It's getting better. And just the more I can remember that. Like, the answer is not more anything. It's just to do it.
Yeah, I think the way that I think about it is like imagine that you're going like hiking or you're going like on a trail and that trail and that hiking path is like to go like create something. Like I think taking like a few things like with you, like consuming some content or learning like a few things and then and then go off, like grab a few things and then go off and like do it. Cause you can get, I mean, there's so many times, actually a great example of this is Dennis DeSantis's book, what is 64 things or I've
74 making music, it's called. Yeah.
Every time
which is free online.
Oh, it is?
You can get the whole book. I'll put a link.
But that's a great example of something that like I've had that book forever and I've never read through the entire thing because every time I open it up, I'll read like, it could even be just a sentence. And immediately my brain goes, wait, what if we try like this? And then I put the book away and then I go off and like, like do something where, and maybe if I were to continue just reading through that, it's like, oh, well, that's a cool idea, but let's see. It's kind of like the YouTube feed thing or like doom scrolling, right? If you're learning stuff, but then you just keep going.
What's next? Yeah.
Yeah. And then if you think of like the backpack analogy, like before you know it, you're just like carrying a camper on your back and then you're like, okay, let's go create something. And like you can't do it. Yeah. You just need a little spark, a little fire starter. And you need to also be able to recognize, like when those moments happen and kind of like act on it. Immediately. At least for me, that's what I've learned in my own processes. Finding little things and recognizing that little inspiration spark and then just go for it.
Yeah, that's smart because it's tempting to build the whole fire.
Yeah.
But you can't until you actually make something. Yeah. As soon as you feel that little thing, I hear that's like how Neil Young is. And he's so prolific and like he'll drop anything and it's just like, sorry, gotta go.
Gotta go. Yeah, got an idea.
Yeah, I'm Neil Young. Gotta go be Neil Young. Yeah, that's cool. I'll try that like next time I'm at work or something. Out of here.
Sorry, guys. Got a brilliant idea, and I must see it through. It's gonna
see what happens. Yeah. Well, cool, man. I think I might have kept you a little longer than we said. I apologize for that.
No, it's fine. It's great.
But a lot of fun talking to you, finally.
Yeah, you too, man. Thanks for having me.
So is like your main site, would you say it's the funthingsfunlife.com?
Yeah.
That's a cool site, by the way. And your Instagram is great. A lot of cool stuff there. I got a whole bunch of links I'll put in there, but I guess like if they want to check out your course, especially, how do you tell them to get to Discord? Because I bet there's a lot of people that would want to do that.
Yeah, I don't know if the Fun Things Fun Life, I don't know if I sent you the proper link, but it's funthingsfunlife.com/links. And that's basically, it's like my link tree. It's just built into the website. And that has like basically everything, all the pertinent information.
Yeah. I've been meaning to do the same thing. It's like, why do I need a link in bio? I want them to come to my page anyway. So I should that's the thing. It's like ideally if you can. Yeah, that's all my wife, she's like a marketing like mastermind and she like helped me with my website and
she was like, well, this is actually what we're going to do is, we have your link tree, which now is, is changing. And then we're going to, integrate that into the website because then they're already going to be there. I'm like, really don't know what you just said, but it sounds really great. And I'm really excited that you have figured this out for me. This is great. Let's
cool.
roll with it.
Yep. Whatever you say.
Yeah. You're smarter
One
than
less
me,
thing to think about. Yeah. That's cool. It's cool to have like that kind of interaction too. So
yeah.
That's awesome, man. Well, I'll let you get to the Yankees game, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yankees in the Rays, which actually the Rays are like my second favorite team. I lived in Tampa for a while, and they have like such a like ragtag team. Like they're if you look at like the payroll of like the Rays versus the Yankees, it's like it's unbelievable. Like the Rays are paying like their entire team like a fraction of what Aaron Judge is getting to, do an at bat. Like it's just I don't know. It's a fun little
that's
fun
cool.
matchup.
Well, I guess either way you win, right?
Yeah. Well, depends on if my wife is watching next to me because she doesn't. She's like, Yankees or die.
Nice.
Well, cool, man. Well, I'd love to like chat again like sometime or just like
absolutely.
I'll keep up on what you're up to. But yeah, man, I'm glad we finally got to like talk, and it's been a long time coming. And also, you just had Francis on, and he's here in Austin, and I met him like I don't know, probably like 4 or 5 months ago, and him and I have become like really close, and we're starting to like hang out every week. He was at our last little like jam thing on Tuesday or on Monday. That was on Monday. So yeah, it's cool to kind of reconnect with some of the Ableton nerds, and have a little bit of a tribe and everything. And again, just following you for so long and being familiar with your work for over a decade at this point. It's cool to finally like meet. And also, I meant to ask you this at the beginning of the episode. Is Funk really your last name or your real last name?
Yeah.
Fucking bastard. What the?
Yeah.
It's so good.
Well, I mean, this is a whole other can of worms. Maybe we'll save it for another time. But like, I know you've gone through like the name thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, like, I've always avoided using my name. One is like a teacher. Just wanted to keep that separate. But also, I don't make funk music, so I thought that would be confusing. Yeah, so then I got into monikers and other things. But now I think this might be another, like I said, thing that I think we can
next time
riff on a bit. Yeah.
Well, cool, man.
We'll wrap it up and say goodbye to everybody. Thank you for listening. Show links in the links in the show notes, so check that out. A lot of cool stuff, and have a good day.
Cool, man.
Thank you for listening to the Music Production Podcast. If you want to help support the show, the best thing you can do is tell a friend, someone you think that would enjoy the show. I'd also love it if you could leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to support my work, you can go to brianfunk.com. I've got tons of Ableton Live packs, tutorials, samples. You can check out my book, The 5-Minute Music Producer, which gives you 365 short music-making activities to help you get started, stay inspired, and finish more music. And there's also the Music Production Club, where you get my latest releases as soon as they're finished. It gives you access to a community of like-minded people who are making music and sharing ideas. You can share your music, find new collaborators, and participate in our live meetings where we set up some kind of musical challenge and then make music together and share our results at the end. That's the Music Production Club. It's a lot of fun, and you can find that and everything that I do at brianfunk.com. Thanks again for listening to the show, and have a great day.